Hello, everyone, and thank you for listening in again. I am Kaylee Bateman, the Content Director at She Can Code, and today we're going to be discussing shareholder activism. The working world has seen an increased focus on environmental, social and governance, or ESG, initiatives in recent years, but what happens when companies are resistant to more ethical and sustainable practices? This is where shareholder activism comes in. Today, we're going to delve into this with someone who is an expert on the topic. It's Jenna Armitage, Chief Marketing Officer at TulipShare. Welcome, Jenna.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Before we get started, can I ask you to share a little bit about your background and yourself, please?
Yeah, so I am born and raised in New York. I have been in the financial services space for actually over 13 years now, which is exciting. Never really thought I'd fall into financial services. Wasn't the career path that I had imagined, but I'm very happy to be here, especially now doing what we're doing here at TulipShare. Prior to TulipShare, I was a marketing director at Fidelity. I was freelance for a couple of years, working with many well-known private equity firms, consulting groups, and what got me into shareholder activism was one of the clients I was working with, Engine Number One, and their campaign against Exxon. And it was really at that moment that I realized I was in the right place at the right time, for sure. And finally, all of my experience in the financial services space was going to really start to align with my passions of changing things for the better. It feels a lot more like you are able to not only just invest for financial returns, but invest to actually drive the change that the world needs. And that's super exciting to me, and I'm really happy to chat with you about it.
Yeah, it's interesting to say that you fell into financial services. We hear that a lot in technology. And that you didn't grow up thinking I would love to go in that area.
Yeah, definitely not. I was definitely looking for jobs when Occupy Wall Street was happening, meaning the only paid jobs you could get by chance were in financial services. Most of the jobs in fashion or things that are a bit more creative, which I had always seen myself kind of gravitating towards, just weren't available at the time. And today I'm grateful because I can see a lot of change and a lot of good I can do in the space that I'm in, both to inspire more women to get engaged and more women to get involved in the financial services space and in technology. But day to day in my role, it's very closely tied to impact. So it's quite nice to know that at the end of the day, the work that you're doing is really seeking to drive change at public companies with global reach and, change the way that you and I live, hopefully.
Yes. Yeah. And today, so we're going to be delving into shareholder activism. It's something that I think a lot of us have heard of, but probably don't understand in depth. Could you explain what exactly is shareholder activism?
Yeah, so it's no surprise most people don't know what shareholder activism is. And the problem really stems back to that as shareholders, we don't feel like owners. When you buy shares in a company, you technically are the owner of that company. So whether that be Apple, Nike, Amazon, Facebook, or Meta now, you name it, you are a partial owner of that company, which means that that company reports back into you. Shareholder activism is the act of investing your money into publicly traded companies and using your shares to influence the company's corporate governance. However, the problem is that most people take a passive approach to investing, and that's not necessarily because they want to. It's just that they're not aware that, or feel like owners of these companies that they actually own shares in. So what we do at TulipShare is we enable individuals to purchase stocks, or so you purchase a share or a fractional share in Tesla because you want Elon Musk's salary to be tied to ESG instead of just his ability to hit financial targets. So it's quite powerful and really, I'd say it's very needed, particularly with COP27 going on as we're recording this. it's very easy to feel powerless with everything that's going on around us. I mean, here in the UK, we didn't elect our current prime minister. We have, no say as to what governments are going to do globally. It just, often feels like you're sitting back without much to do. And shareholder activism is a world that enables individuals to, invest, to, start to speak out to some of the biggest companies in the world.
It sounds, I suppose, to some people, it sounds quite daunting to think that, you invest and that you could, at an absolute extreme level, pressure a management team to make change. But I suppose it's not quite at that level, is it for most of these things? I suppose you think of investors, as you say, like Elon Musk, and you think, oh no, that's really not for me. But I take it, on an everyday example of shareholder activism, actually it's not as extreme as that.
No, that's why, retail investors especially never got involved in shareholder activism. The shareholder activism that I'd assume most people are aware of are more the stories that you see in Billions or Succession, where you have these big hedge funds, these rich, wealthy individuals that are looking to pressure companies so that they can, they identify these companies because they're falling short on some financials, and the investor sees an opportunity to fix the operations on that company to make more money. We're identifying ethical issues that are at the company, which do pose a risk to the financials as well, but not an immediate one. So most investors will ignore it, but we're saying, you can't really ignore climate change anymore. And, and soon governments are starting, governments are even getting involved. So it's very much in the near term that, you must change and agree to hit these targets. Otherwise we're in big trouble here. And that's where I'd say TulipShare is much different. That, and both the fact that, you don't have to invest a lot of money. You can invest 25 pounds and be a part of this movement. And, what we do is we then collectivize the shares of all of our users so that we can put more pressure on the company. And that's really where we're able to do so much.
Can you give us any examples of shareholder activism?
Yeah. So at TulipShare, we recently had a campaign where we had 3 campaigns that we submitted proposals on. One at Johnson & Johnson that was looking for them to stop the global sales of talc-based baby powder, which was known to cause cancer, primarily in women, and has been the sale of talc-based baby powder had been discontinued in North America due to lawsuits and litigation issues that they had faced as a result of its ties to cancer. However, the company continued to sell it globally. We launched the campaign because we've only been around for a year. We launched the campaign, I'd say, a couple of months prior to the annual general meeting, the AGM for Johnson & Johnson. And Johnson & Johnson has since announced that they are discontinuing the global sales of talc-based baby powder at the end of the year. So I'd say that's a big one, and one that we've shown, the power that you can have as an individual to back, a campaign like this through TulipShare. The next stage from there is to also show kind of how these decisions that the company is making are also, proving to show some growth for the company as well financially, because ultimately when you invest, you're investing to, earn returns, hit financial targets, reach different life goals that you have. And so, we're working on kind of bridging that narrative, which is exciting, but that's, I'd say, one good example that I have that I can share with you.
Yeah, I mean, perfect, because my next question actually is, why is shareholder activism important? But obviously from what you've just said, it brings about change, from a small scale right up to somebody as large as Johnson & Johnson. Yeah,
I think when governance is an important thing to have, right? But when companies are able to operate and nobody's questioning their decisions, it's not something to say, you're doing something wrong. It's really about having a growth mindset, right?
Yeah.
And making sure that you're staying true to, your company mission, vision, values, that you're staying relevant for, your customers, and your investors are also your customers as well as your owners. But, you often I can say I personally, and I can't give any financial advice, but I tend to, and wouldn't want anybody to take this as any financial advice, but I personally choose to invest in companies and brands that I believe in, and so when you take that approach, I think governance can really be used for good. Like for instance, Nike, I played sports growing up. I was, played soccer in university, and used Nike products all the time. With Nike, I can't stand kind of like the issues that it has across its supply chain with garment workers. And, that's where TulipShare allows me to say, you know what, I'm a fan of Nike, but I can't stand the way it's producing its products. And, I'm going to work to communicate that by investing on TulipShare and backing this campaign, to try and make a difference in the long term.
Yeah. I agree there entirely. And you mentioned climate change a little bit already. Could shareholder activism be the key to tackling climate change and sustainability?
It could be one of the keys for sure. Because shareholder activism, pushes companies to report and act around these issues, and how it's causing climate change, or consistently not meeting targets, et cetera. And these are all, that's an operational problem, right? At the company, this isn't just they're not operationalizing or prioritizing this. But shareholder activism, yes, can definitely be one of the keys that that can help stop, I personally believe can be one of the keys that can help solve issues around climate change. It does take, collaboration with government, with people, but you can't, I'm a big believer that you can't blame consumers. These companies are marketing to consumers, and, we need to be better. And I think shareholder activism can be a great tool that can be leveraged to help in tackling the issues around climate change, for sure.
Yeah, and in terms of ESG shareholder activism, is that on the rise, do you think?
100%. Yeah, we've seen numbers of proposals going up year over year, 100%. And, TulipShare is the first platform that allows individuals to get involved in shareholder activism, both in voting and also submitting our own proposals. So we don't just, because there's other voting platforms out there, or ways that, some investors, depending on what platform they're investing on, can actually vote at the AGM. And also assuming that they meet specific criteria. It's quite, it's hard to understand, as an investor, what rights you have, where, based off of where you bought your shares, et cetera. So yeah, I'd say, shareholder activism is definitely on the rise in terms of, both the amount of parties that are getting involved. It's definitely been, picking up in the media quite a lot, which means that consumers are slowly becoming more aware, which is all positive for sure.
Yeah, you just mentioned there about people understanding, or investors understanding, where to get their information. Where do they start with that?
Well, I think first understanding kind of what platform are you using today to invest, and, are you investing individually in stocks? Are you purchasing, are you buying them through funds or ETFs, which is a big one, and speaking to your broker, so that you can understand kind of what is their policy on this. And it's worth the time. It's worth the time, and it's worth the effort to understand, because otherwise, if you forfeit your right to vote, you're losing out on the opportunity to make sure that your money is being aligned with your values. And that's definitely something that I'm prioritizing for 2023 personally, and something I'd encourage others to do as well. I'm not sure if you've heard of Make My Money Matter, but they do a lot of really cool marketing campaigns around your pension schemes, because that's a big one, because everybody here in the UK has a pension scheme, and they have really big facts and figures on, how many people's pensions are funding deforestation, and other big things that they don't. They did a really funny media stunt around that, showing a couple getting, huge tools and stuff like that are used to chop down trees, and paying attention to kind of how your money is being funded is really important because it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if you're eating organic, if you're, following your own personal reuse refills policy, in your household, or driving an electric car. Your pension scheme, is accruing and kind of working against you in that capacity. So paying attention to your money is super important.
Yeah, something that I think most people probably haven't even thought of to that extent. How effective is shareholder activism in achieving results? I mean, you mentioned a couple of examples already. Obviously, the Johnson & Johnson one was highly successful. But what about, other examples?
Other examples of success in shareholder, it's really a case-by-case scenario in terms of how successful is shareholder activism, and to date. There's lots of, you hear like engine number one's takeover of Exxon's board, or not takeover, sorry. They got 3 board seats, which was great, and really kind of ensured that they had people with the right credentials to be helping Exxon transition to a more climate friendly policy and path forward, which is very important. But I'd say, change takes time. So, it's definitely, I'd say, harder. I mean, there's been studies on some of the shareholder proposals that were like, I believe it was on Starbucks and their racial equity audit. And you can follow kind of how like the success on an individual level. I think the reporting as a whole, like, so looking at, these proposals have been passed, what's happened with the company since, it's that level of communication, I think, certainly needs to be enhanced by the investor relations teams. But it is starting to get better because they're, investor relations teams at these companies are having to deal with such a huge influx of number of proposals being sent. And in the US, they've now made it even easier for investors to submit proposals. There was most recently, they removed this duplicative proposal rule, which now means that there's going to be a lot of proposals that are being presented to the company and board, assuming everything gets passed, and around maybe tackling climate change, but the only thing different is the way in which that they're tackling climate change. And so, I mean, I think that's such a positive thing there, right? Because it makes sure that the conversation is coming up multiple times and the board is listening. So, you're getting the attention of the board and the most senior people at that company. And, that ought to flag that, your investors really do care about this. And, you should probably start to incorporate this into your long-term business plans, because if not, you're going to lose eventually. And that's not going to be a good thing, both for the company or your owners. So.
Yeah, and what about the companies? What should companies be doing to mitigate the risk of shareholder activism on ESG?
I think, being more transparent, open, and honest is really key. Investor relations is changing, and the way that companies need to start engaging with their investors is changing as a result. I mean, the way that we communicated the way that we communicate with each other is also changing. People want more information real time, so that experience just needs to get better in general. So I think definitely being a bit more interactive, open, honest, even when numbers aren't looking right or you're unsure. I mean, ESG isn't an easy thing to track or measure too, which is a huge problem. I think being, open about that and listen to, listen to your shareholders, and, both big and small, is really important. And I hope, and we're starting to see bits of that, new wave and kind of participation on the investor relations side with companies come to fruition, which is great, because obviously it just creates, like, there doesn't need to be animosity. It shouldn't be such a fight. Like, I think having more open and honest conversations around these issues, and being comfortable being a bit vulnerable, even on the company side, is a good thing and positive, and will help us, reach these different targets together more quickly, and it will just be a positive thing for everyone.
Yeah, and obviously, companies being more transparent is a huge thing to push forward. But what can our listeners do, on an individual level, if they wanted to push for change and they weren't really sure at the moment what to do? Is there anything that they can do themselves?
I think the first step is really just taking a look at your investments and understanding, where your investments held. Like I said, everybody has a pension. I think that's probably the first place to start. Spend a half an hour every Sunday for the month of January or something like that. Just basically trying to just understand kind of where your what's your current financial setup. Where is your money invested, and have a conversation. If you have a financial advisor, speak to them, and start to just evaluate kind of what are your values, what do you want your investments to stand for, and how do you want to kind of resort your financial plans in a way that aligns to your values, and that's something you can really work with a financial advisor on, for sure. I would definitely speak, if you are investing directly on a brokerage platform, I would definitely speak to them and understand what your rights are for, as a share owner or shareholder, to see kind of, understand the process. Are you eligible to vote? And really just speak to them, ask questions. You can always go, if you have any questions, our team at TulipShare is always happy to support around that. So I would definitely welcome them to go to TulipShare. There's a help bot on our page, and you can speak to our customer success team that can also help in pointing you to the right direction, which might be helpful as well.
I suppose a lot of people, or a lot of shareholders, probably weren't aware that they could ask questions as well.
Yeah, you can. You have rights as a shareholder. And I think that's one thing that's very important is, as an investor, you have rights whenever even buy into, an ETF fund, or, just in terms of what the reporting that you receive back. And unfortunately, the user experience maybe isn't as seamless or easy. I, for one, never found it personally to be, very easy. The amount of email notifications I would receive was just too much, that it's really easy to kind of, I'd say, just drown, be kind of not paying attention to kind of what's happening behind the scenes. So I'd say just kind of, really just setting some time aside, and just, making sure that you're emailing and asking those questions and following up on it is huge.
Yeah. And what do you think the future will bring for shareholder activism and ESG?
I think the future is going to be a lot more transparent. I'm hoping that, increased number of shareholder activism, or shareholder proposals, and what have you, will increase the amount of data each of these companies are tracking and measuring and sharing, both with the public and their investors, to a certain extent. And, that's going to create competition. So if you have Coca-Cola, being pressured to have a refill reuse policy and they adopt it, well, Pepsi, what are you doing about that? So I think that is going to create massive change in industries that really need some help And I mean, these companies, the people running these companies they're, very, very smart, very capable individuals. And if you get them focused on different goals and objectives, we're going to start to see those targets being met. And that's a really cool thing.
Yeah, well, we have run out of time, I'm afraid. It goes incredibly fast here when we're talking about a really interesting topic. So thank you so much for joining us. I'm sure a lot of listeners probably didn't realise that, they can actually bring about change when it comes to their investments, and they probably, especially the thought of their pension, probably hadn't even crossed their minds. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Pleasure being here.
Thank you. And for everybody listening, as always, thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you again next time.